Perfection, a concept in question. The idea of perfection has always seemed elusive, and it's something that has bothered me for as long as I can remember. Society tends to uphold perfection as a standard to strive toward, whether that's through ideals of beauty, behavior, or achievement. But when we pause and consider the notion of perfect, it raises some intriguing questions. If something is truly perfect, why would it need any input, adjustment, or improvement? Shouldn't it simply exist in its ideal form, effortlessly fulfilling its purpose without external influence? The paradox of perfection is that it's a concept that seems to require constant maintenance and validation in the real world. If something were genuinely perfect, it would exist outside of the realm of change. Yet, everything around us, every person, every system, and every living thing, is in a state of perpetual flux. Change, growth, and evolution are inherent to the world we live in. So, when we consider the possibility of perfection, it feels fundamentally at odds with the nature of life itself, which is in constant motion and transformation. How can something be perfect if it is still subject to the passage of time and the need for adjustment? This contradiction becomes even more apparent when we think about how perfection might manifest in the real world. For instance, if we imagine a perfect being in the context of living organisms, it might resemble something like a vegetarian Henry Cavill, physically impeccable, perhaps, but also in harmony with nature, living without harm to other creatures. It's a curious image because it speaks to the idea of perfection not just as an aesthetic or moral concept, but as a balance between the physical, the environmental, and the ethical dimensions of life. Yet, this type of perfection would still be subjective. What one person deems perfect in another might not align with someone else's perspective. And this is where the challenge lies. The concept of perfection relies on subjective interpretations that vary across individuals, cultures, and contexts. A perfect person, thing, or idea doesn't have universal application. Instead, it exists as a collection of traits that appeal to a specific person or group based on their values, experiences, and desires. It becomes clear that being optimal is not an objective truth, it is subjective. What one person might consider the best or the most ideal may not hold the same value to another. And this subjectivity is what challenges the idea of a universal standard of perfection. It's not enough to simply meet a checklist of ideal characteristics. Instead, the real value lies in how a thing, a person, or an idea resonates with others. In other words, perfection can only be categorized as having universal positive value if it serves the needs, desires, and perspectives of everyone. But the problem is, those needs and desires differ from person to person. In this light, perfection is a constantly shifting, ever-evolving idea. It may appear to be the ideal, but it's also something that's difficult, if not impossible, to define or hold on to. What's perfect in one moment might not be perfect in the next. A thing's perfection is, therefore, contingent on both time and perspective. Reflecting on this, it's easy to see how frustrating it can be when we're constantly striving for something that feels just out of reach. Take last week, for instance. I found it to be utterly frustrating, a week filled with challenges and setbacks. But in moments of frustration, there's also room for growth, and with that comes the hope that this week might be better. The idea of striving for something better, something more harmonious, is, in itself, part of our journey. Even if we can never truly reach perfect, we can always move towards something more ideal for ourselves, guided by our subjective understanding of what that means. So, perhaps perfection isn't something to be attained. Instead, it might be a continuous process of aligning with the world around us, growing, adjusting, and learning as we go. It's about finding balance in the journey, rather than in an unreachable end point. In the end, the hope lies in knowing that even when perfection seems just beyond our grasp, the act of striving for it, and the awareness that it is a subjective pursuit, can lead us to a more nuanced and meaningful understanding of our existence. Maybe this week will bring us closer to that understanding, and perhaps the process itself is what makes life worth living.
Hip.